Okay, let's go ahead and get this show on the road. My guests, if you can airplane mode your phones, that'd be wonderful. Welcome everyone to today's webinar on how to ensure data sovereignty and compliance. We are so happy that you could join us. My name is Danielle Barber. I'm excited to host this webinar and share some strategies as well as best practices to help you manage sensitive data communication in alignment with data privacy as well as sovereignty regulations. Before we dive right in, I want to just take a quick moment to introduce you to everyone. As you know, I'm Danielle, Director of Product Marketing, Regulatory Compliance here at Kiteworks. My role is to be the global compliance expert and ensure I communicate to our prospective customers as well as to our current customers about our private content network and how it can support them in meeting regulatory requirements. Prior to joining Kiteworks, I had direct experience with regulatory compliance within the medical tech startup space and previously worked in the insurance and software industries. But the reason that we're here, of course, is for our spectacular guests. I can't even overstate that enough. And I can't tell you how excited I am because we've got two experts in their fields who have incredibly different but very important reasons to take data sovereignty just so seriously. Joining us today, I have Camilo Artigo-Purcell, General Counsel here at Kiteworks, as well as Philip Wittick, Director of Revenue at Dracoon. Camilo, can you spend a minute or two just telling us about yourself? And then Philip, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Happy to. Thank you, Danielle, and thank you for the superlatives. I grew up on the litigation side of the house and did about a decade doing high stakes corporate litigation. At some point, when you see the problems repeat themselves over and over, it dawned on me that I should spend some time on risk mitigation and advising companies on ways to address problems before they ever happen. And so, in addition to litigation, I now focus on corporate issues, data privacy, and data sovereignty is top of mind. It's a dynamic issue, and I'm very pleased to be here to chat about it.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Camilo. Philip, we'd love to hear from you.
Yes. Hi, everybody. And of course, hi, Danielle. Hi, Camilo. Thank you for the amazing introduction. My name is Philip Wittek, and I'm the Director of Revenue at Dracoon. So German-based Dracoon provides a secure file sharing and collaboration service to over 500,000 users worldwide, including major companies across industries like transportation, finance, healthcare, and many more. And with industry-specific solutions and general certifications like BSI C5, we meet the highest security standards. So Dracoon enables efficient and compliant file sharing, along with features like encrypted email attachments, Cloud Drive, home drive integration, and it's API first. So you should definitely check it out. But well, I'm very happy today that to announce, or not to announce, but to be a part of the growing Kiteworks family with Dracoon. And personally, I've been in data privacy and data protection industry for my whole professional career. And I've helped hundreds of companies to protect their data and to ensure data sovereignty and compliance. So I'm very happy here to join this talk today, and thank you again.
Thank you so much. And for everyone who's watching, I did just put in a link within the chat if you want to go ahead and check out a little bit more about this amazing new change for Kiteworks and Dracoon. Please go ahead and check out the press release. Let's go ahead and just dive right in. First, let's level set, though, on what data sovereignty is, because I think that there can be a lot of confusion. There can be a lot of, gosh, what is this? How does this apply to me and to what my organization does? At a really high level, data sovereignty refers to the idea that data is subject to the laws and the governance of the country in which it is collected as well as stored. Many nations have data localization laws dictating that certain data can only be kept within their unique borders. This is really important for national security, domestic surveillance, economic protections, things like that. Camilo, can you provide an overview of your legal perspective?
I can, and like any good lawyer, I'll begin with there is no definitive answer or definition of data sovereignty, but generally, data sovereignty statutes give governments the right to control the movement and storage of their citizens' data. And there's two buckets. The most obvious is the set of data sovereignty rules at the national level, but we also see a growing number of data sovereignty laws that apply at the state and local level as well. The underlying thread in these statutes is that the government has a responsibility to protect its citizens' data from unauthorized access or use. But the other piece of this is an urge by certain nation states to exert more control over their citizens' data and data in general. In thinking about data sovereignty, my view is it really dovetails with the broader subset of privacy regulations. And the two components that often get talked about hand in hand with data sovereignty are this notion of data residency and data localization policies. In terms of the larger privacy rules, most of us are familiar with those, ranging from issues of consent, use, storage, and of course, cybersecurity. But in terms of data residency and data localization, these concepts are not as discussed. So at a high level, data residency refers to the geographic location where data is stored and processed. And it's a concept that focuses on ensuring that data is subject to specific legal and regulatory frameworks based on the data's physical location. Data localization is a heightened issue that many folks are opining on, for better or for worse, but it deals with policies that impose obligations on companies to store and process data domestically rather than a free exchange on servers internationally. Again, data localization is driven by regulatory, security, and national interest considerations. And I think as we talk about data sovereignty, the key area of the market to keep in mind is this rapid consolidation of cloud computing. And so data sovereignty has become this tool which pits, on the one hand, cost efficiencies and free flows of data against the countervailing policies of security, privacy, and control. And the idea here is to strike a fair balance. But again, this is very dynamic and growing at a fast clip.
Agreed. It's all about that balance, walking that fine line, really making sure that you're staying true to these laws and regulations, staying on the right side of it, but still making sure that there's that free data flow. Thank you so much, Camila. That's actually a really great jumping off point for us. And even though it's I know you didn't want to get too detailed, I think you got perfectly detailed. So thank you for that. Now that we really understand what data sovereignty is, Philip, can you speak a little bit about why it has become just so critical for companies today and why it's such a critical issue for them?
Yeah, of course, Danielle. Well, data sovereignty is critical for companies and governments for several reasons. And this is why we are so many people watching today. So you all know it's important, it's critical for businesses and governments. And I will give you some reasons. I think there are many, many more, but this is just the one of the main reasons. Firstly, well, avoiding cross-border data transfers, and I'm not just talking about country borders, but any border, company border, and so on. Data transfers that violate regulations to avoid this is essential. With the rise of data protection laws like GDPR or many others you will later present, companies must ensure that personal data does not move outside of legal jurisdictions without proper safeguards. And non-compliance with these rules can lead to really hefty fines and severe reputational damage, which can be a significant setback for any business or even government. So there are several examples for these hefty fines, and we will come to that later. So I think maybe 3 years ago, many were just talking about these hefty fines, but they actually happened. And for example, the EU showed that they will really fine companies for non-compliance. Secondly, well, maintaining control over sensitive citizen, government, or business data is very important, obviously. In today's world, data is a strategic asset. This isn't news for you, but you should just remember that it's so important to protect this asset. And losing control over this asset means really risking anything, everything. And unauthorized access can have huge consequences for not just the security on national or business or even personal privacy. So by sticking to data sovereignty principles, companies and governments can prevent such breaches, uphold the trusted place in them, and just be a trusted place by the companies and by businesses. Thirdly, aligning with privacy regulations like the GDPR, for example, it's not just about compliance, it's about respecting individual rights and offering a culture of real transparency and accountability. In the digital age, consumers and clients are more informed and sensitive about their data rights. So companies that prioritize data sovereignty are better positioned to build long-term relationships with customers based on trust and mutual respect. But once again, non-compliance with these regulations is not just about moral, but can also lead to hefty fines and reputational damage. So lastly, I would highlight one thing. Preventing third-party access to proprietary data is crucial. In a competitive business landscape, data is key to innovation and maintaining a competitive edge. So if proprietary data falls into the wrong hands, competitors' hands, for example, to poor sovereignty practices, it can lead to loss of intellectual property, undermines a company's position in the market, and, well, of course, you have to stay a step ahead of your competitors. So please protect your data. So I think in conclusion, data sovereignty is a multifaceted issue that impacts legal compliance, control over sensitive information and data, competitive advantage, and of course, customer and client trust. So it's a critical issue because it intersects with these core operations of a company and a government, of course. And its long-term sustainability in the global market is so important.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you. That was absolutely wonderful. And, you know, it leads in really well to the next slide that we have here. I'm so glad that you talked about the EU and GDPR, because ever since that came out, you know, 5-6 years ago now, it really has become just the framework for a lot of other data sovereignty and data privacy laws and regulations. It's so important. Yeah, and there's so many new data sovereignty regulations in different countries that have different laws and regulations that are governing the handling of this personal data. As of now, there's, you know, here on your slide right here, you can see there's an example of some of the better well known, some of the bigger various data sovereignty regulations and laws just around the world. Camilo, which regulations do you see organizations are most concerned with, and why are you seeing their concern grow with these regulations?
Danielle, I was not expecting a trick question. I think, you know, it's a great question. I think to take a step back, because folks listening will be from various jurisdictions. So I mean, the CCPA, for example, is often in the news, but the first place to address this is on a company by company basis. So you really need to do an inventory of in which jurisdictions do I store and transmit data. That's the very first step. And so on a company by company basis, you want to be able to inventory the different jurisdictions where you will have to comply. In terms of specific frameworks, regulations that percolate across several businesses, I'd start historically with the US Cloud Act, where there's a very significant give and take between data sovereignty principles generally and the interests of the United States specifically. So under the US Cloud Act, the government here clarified that US companies are subject to United States laws no matter where in the world they're operating or whose data they're storing. So as an example, if a United States company is storing data in the European Union, the United States government under the Cloud Act would have access to those documents. It cuts the other way as well. Under the Cloud Act, it makes it easier for foreign governments to request documents within the United States. So again, this is a very controversial issue. And the bottom line for companies is to sort out, when you're working with third-party vendors, how, to the extent they are transmitting or storing your data, how does that interplay with the US Cloud Act? Because the last thing you want is a situation where you think you have exclusive control over your data, but in reality, a third-party vendor has the ability to access your data and respond to a government subpoena by providing your data unbeknownst to you. So that's one. The other one, which is top of mind for any business doing work in Europe, is of course the GDPR. So under the GDPR data sovereignty rules, there are no limitations on the transmission of data within EU countries. However, there are strict regulations on the transmission of data from an EU country outside of the EU. And there are adequacy regulations. So if the recipient country is not deemed to have adequate data security, then you cannot transmit the data from the EU to that third-party country. Before, I believe it was July of this year, the United States was not on the list of countries that had adequate data protection, and therefore, out of the gate, you were barred from transmitting data from the EU to the United States. In July, that changed, and now the United States is among the list of countries that are deemed to have adequate data protection. The caveat for companies on this call is that it's not a carte blanche. So long as you're venued in the United States, you can transfer documentation back and forth with the EU. Instead, the adequacy finding means that US companies still have to join the EU-US data privacy framework. And in doing so, you're committing to abide by a certain threshold of cybersecurity and privacy controls within your institution, so that the EU has comfort that the data of its citizens are being treated appropriately. So I would underscore that the key is, on a company by company basis, doing an internal audit to sort out precisely where your data resides, which jurisdictions it touches, wherever that may be around the world, and then doing a deep dive into what the scope of data sovereignty regulations and data privacy, for that matter, regulations are across the jurisdictions, and then ensure you're in compliance. And then in the future, before you sign up with new vendors, before you decide to enter new markets, it's a very good idea to get a summary of the regulations you'll be governed by, because depending on the jurisdiction, you want to be able to make a business decision based on the economics. How much is it going to cost me to comply with the rules in jurisdiction ABC?
Nice, thank you. And Camila, thank you so much for going into so much detail, especially about the adequacy decision. I did just post a link for everyone who's watching. We, back in July, created an asset going through this a little bit. So if you're interested in that, you want a little bit more details, please go ahead and read it. And thank you also, Camila, for talking about the encryption keys and how sometimes those can be provided to the government without an organization even understanding that that's happened, without even knowing that now the government has access to all of their data. I want to circle back to that in, I think, a few more slides. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I think it's really going to interest people as we move forward a little bit. So, very similar to what both gentlemen here have said already, in the most in-your-face terms, the reason organizations should take data sovereignty seriously are the fines that are associated with non-compliance. And here on this slide before you are just a few of the larger fines that have been handed down recently. The biggest one that you're going to be seeing is in China. The ride-hailing firm DD Global was fined just less than $1.2 billion by the Cyberspace Administration of China. Yes, that's billion dollars, after it decided that the company violated the nation's network security law, data security law, and personal information protection law. And then in the EU, as Philip said, GDPR, it's got some teeth, and they really are not shy about fining organizations as often as they can, to be quite honest. If you are not following these laws, these regulations, they're coming. They really are. So in the EU, GDPR has already fined over $4.5 billion to different organizations. And you'll see here on this list before you, a lot of them have been coming out of Ireland. The Irish Data Protection Commission, they're going for companies. They're following up with them. Let's see, in 2021, 2 years ago, Amazon's financial records revealed that officials in Luxembourg issued an $877 million fine for breaches of GDPR. In September of this year, just a couple of months ago, TikTok was handed a $370 million fine by the Irish DPC for violating children's data privacy under GDPR law. So they actually found that TikTok had not been transparent enough with children about its privacy settings, and how they actually raised questions about how that data about children was processed. Then in November of just last year, the, again, Irish DPC fined Meta $277 million for the compromise of 500 million users and their personal information. So really big fines that are associated, especially in the EU with GDPR. It's got teeth, and they're, like I said, they're not afraid to go after companies. And then in the US, I feel like the US is really getting its act together with this. There's a lot of, as you saw on the previous slide, a lot of different state laws that are coming out regarding data privacy, data sovereignty. And in California, Sephora was fined just over $1 million by the OAG, which alleged that they violated California's unfair competition law by engaging in practices like making false or misleading statements concerning the sale of consumers' personal information, and unfairly deprived customers of the ability to just opt out of sales. So something as simple as that, not letting customers opt out of the sale of their personal information, cost them about a $1.2 million fine. The really important thing to note here is how large and far-reaching data sovereignty laws, as well as their corresponding fines, are. It's vital for organizations to take this so seriously, not only to retain customer trust and organizational integrity, but simply to stay in business. This is something that is here, and it's here to stay. And like I said, they're not afraid to start really going after these companies and making sure that they are following the laws and regulations. All right, AI. I love AI. Marketing at Kiteworks loves AI, so we've got to talk about it. And of course, this is the emerging technology that creates so much new data sovereignty challenges. It's within the rapid growth of large language models like ChatGPT, like all of the tools that I know we're all using constantly. They're such lifesavers. But these generative AI models are trained on immense sets of web data to create human-like content on any topic. And the outputs, while they can be incredibly useful, also expose sensitive data and have data sovereignty risks that we'll discuss in the next slide. But Philip, like I said, we love AI here in marketing. We love it here at Kiteworks. But I'd love to know a little bit from your perspective. Can you give us an idea of what AI is looking like now?
Yeah. Well, Danielle, you love AI. Kiteworks Marketing loves AI. I love AI. So that's a hot topic right now. I could probably spend the whole day with reading AI news, but I still won't keep up. I think just today the European Parliament was discussing using AI for face recognition. Google released their own AI with Gemini 2 days ago. Just so many amazing developments. So once again, personally, I'm a huge fan, and I see many opportunities and possibilities AI has to offer. But let's stay in context a little bit. I think AI, especially large language models like ChatGPT and, well, Gemini, of course, have changed the game. So today, AI is not just anymore that futuristic concept. So I would say a few years ago, if you ask anybody about AI, they would maybe talk about Star Trek or some science fiction. And 1 or 2 years ago, I think most people were just having fun with ChatGPT, fooling around and try to tickle out some of the most ridiculous answers. But from my perspective, at least in the last 12 months, AI became just a practical tool. Everybody can integrate into its daily work or even personal lives. It just helps you to analyze, generate content, of course, and help us, for example, personalize customer interactions and, for example, predict market trends, whatever. So it really became a useful tool, not just something you can play around with. But as you said, there are new challenges, and particularly regarding data sovereignty and security. So these AI models, of course, they need a huge amount of data from various sources, including, of course, sensitive sources and sensitive information. So these data are on risk of being exposed or being transferred into any way, and it might not comply with business and any other regulation we've been discussing. So just earlier this week, a team of researchers have found a very simple way of extracting training data from ChatGPT. The attack method was super simple, and you can just research that. The researchers described it as kind of silly, and it involved telling ChatGPT to repeat a certain word forever. So for instance, you could prompt, repeat the word Kiteworks forever. And ChatGPT would repeat the word for a while and then start including parts of what appear to be the exact data it has been trained on. And the researchers have found that this included information such as email addresses, phone numbers, and other unique identifiers. So, if we just think one step ahead, it could be that, for example, a company is using a large language model which is trained on their company's data, for example, to provide some customer support or to provide their customers with some information. And if they use an attack similar to that, they could potentially extract sensitive data. So to mitigate this risk, we must be aware about the data sets our AI tools are using, ensuring, for example, that they are clean and do not contain any proprietary or sensitive information, and of course protect these data, for example. So we need to be transparent with our customers and clients about how their data, for example, is being used in our AI systems, and just stay ahead of the curve by continually assessing our AI practices against current and upcoming data sovereignty laws. So to sum it up, while AI is a powerful asset for every company, at least from my point of perspective, responsible use is key here. And by prioritizing data sovereignty in AI operations, companies can maintain their commitment to data privacy and security, keeping the usage compliant and preserving their reputation as a trustworthy company. While AI development is on high speed, many governments and organizations are already discussing compliance and regulation. So we will definitely follow, and we will see this in the next few months and years. So this is my point of view.
I love it. Thank you. And I love the emphasis on responsibility of of AI and really making sure that you're in charge of the information that you have and how responsible you're utilizing it. So thank you so much. That's a great point that I think doesn't get said very often. Camila, now that we know a little bit more about AI, I'd really like, and of course, how some people are using it and how they're integrating it within their current data sets. I'd love to know your legal opinion on the risks that we are seeing for data sovereignty directly because of AI.
Thank you for the question. I think it dovetails nicely with Philip's point about responsibility. And I think using these models personally is very fun, but when we start to incorporate it into the business, it's of critical importance that we know that the content being spit out is accurate and that the data that we input to the systems is being protected. So, I mean, in my personal view, there is a natural tension between building out accurate AI models that we can use in the corporate context, which pushes up against this burgeoning area of data sovereignty. And the reason I take this position is that AI learns from data. So the wider, the more diverse the data set, the more accurate the outputs from the AI model. And so in a data sovereignty context, if we limit the data inputs to one community, to one jurisdiction, by default, the AI model will begin to develop biases, which invariably would favor one jurisdiction over another. And so I think there's a real tension between complying with data sovereignty regulations and obtaining the most useful, accurate AI models. And that's something that's in flux. Another article, Philip, that I'm sure will be in the papers any day now. The other side of this, though, from the government's perspective, is I also think there's a growing concern around the consolidation of AI technology in a few companies and a few jurisdictions. Namely, the United States is becoming, head and shoulders, moving faster in this than other jurisdictions. And so I've heard discussions around what's been coined modern colonialism, where one jurisdiction basically controls the world's data, and that the AI models, the outputs will be controlled, manipulated, that it won't be done organically, but that somehow there will be manipulation. And so I tend to think that we should use AI and move forward quickly on this. But again, I think, Philip, you said it perfectly, that doing so in a responsible way that acknowledges the sovereignty of the various nations and critically, very intentionally protects the data inputs is something we need to do. That's sort of the macro concern, legal concern that AI poses in the data sovereignty context. I think in terms of a nuts and bolts legal risk posed by AI, it's the concern of, if at the company level we're building out AI models, the second the model is internet facing, there's the risk that we lose control over safeguarding the data inputs. And so it's that piece on a day-to-day basis that we need to be thinking about. How do we create these fantastic tools that make life better for companies and their customers, but simultaneously do it in a responsible way that ensures that we don't unwittingly let data escape when it needs to be protected.
Thank you. Thank you. I love the continuous thought between both of you of responsibility, responsibility, responsibility. It's just so pivotal for these organizations to have that responsibility and to start with that, secure by design, secure by default sort of mentality to really make sure that we are taking responsibility for our data. Given these risks, what solutions, I'd like to hear from both of you. Camilo, I'll ask you first. But given these risks, what solutions would you recommend for mitigating data sovereignty issues created by these AI systems?
I think the only way to deal with this is to implement intentional content-defined policies. So you're literally baking into your systems granular controls based on the type of data. And so we would put it into, let's say, 3 buckets. So data that we classify as low risk, you'd apply a content-defined zero trust policy. If for the next level of data, you'd call it moderate risk, and there would be view-only permissions. And then for the most secret, the most sensitive data, we would denote it as high risk, and you'd use digital rights management tools to literally prevent the data from ever leaving the organization. The other piece here, so there's 2 sides to this. The first is making sure you implement the policies. The second is the audit trail, so that if there's an incident, if a regulatory body comes to you and says, prove out that you are complying with these data sovereignty regulations, you have the audit trail to prove it out. So that's in sort of the most pragmatic sense. That's how I think about mitigating the risks we discussed posed by AI. But again, these content-based policies should not be limited to AI concerns. It should be something that's discussed at the highest level of companies across the world when it comes to privacy issues, when it comes to building out appropriate cybersecurity protocols within the institution.
Thank you, Camila. One thing that you said that really struck for me as I'm looking at a lot of these regulations and laws, not just with data sovereignty, but with any kind of compliance, that it's proof. Yes, you say you're doing it. That's great, but can you prove it? Do you have an audit trail? Can you actually point to it and say, we've done this? So thank you so much for pointing that out. I think it's so pivotal and sometimes can be lost in the rush to get everything done and check all the boxes. Philip, Camila was talking about content-based policies. I'd love to hear from you as Director of Revenue. What do you see as the benefits of using content-based policies?
Yes. Well, in the context of AI, I think content-based policies are the key to reduce any AI data sovereignty risks. AI is nothing without data, and everything it pulls out currently is by the data it has and by the training data, by the data it was trained with. So I think it's crucial to have these content-based policies, as Camilo said, not just in AI, but everywhere. But I will stick to AI at the moment. So protecting any confidential information and managing regulatory compliance risk, just to ensure that all these AI systems that are in place and other systems that are in place stick to data protection and privacy standards, and of course to the standards the company itself or the government itself sets for itself. So I think limiting the use of data outside the data sovereignty boundaries is required by the regulations of course, specific countries, specific companies. And for example, if you deploy any AI service in your business application, you have to make sure that which data is it, or which content is it allowed to use for training, and which content is it allowed to release to specific users, to specific people. So I think by implementing these content-based policies, organizations can really navigate through these complexities of data sovereignty, whilst just safeguarding their data and being compliant with any regulation and respecting, for example, diversity in terms of laws and regulations. So once again, I think using content-based policies is the key for that.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. God, I love having these two very different points of view regarding data sovereignty, but still coming around to the same overall conclusions as far as why these are so important and really kind of how to get there. So thank you so much, gentlemen. Camilo, I wanted to talk a little bit about, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about single-tenant hosting for isolation, something that we do over here at Kiteworks. I'd like to know if you can tell us a little bit about why single-tenant hosting matters so much for data sovereignty in particular.
I'm more than happy to. I mean, this is a critical issue. The easiest way to describe it is that in a multi-tenant environment, your company is in essence Swiss cheese. This is the analogy that's been used, and I think it's very useful. The idea would be, let's say you're using the Microsoft suite of products, and in the highly sophisticated world of criminal hacking these days, the criminal hacker can literally set up a shell institution, purchase a bona fide license for the Microsoft suite, and then in the multi-tenant has direct access to hack, i.e. the Swiss cheese analogy. In a single tenant environment, that doesn't exist. You literally have a perimeter where the company has its standalone ecosystem, single tenant ecosystem. And in terms of data sovereignty, when you have a single tenant ecosystem, you can control what comes in and what goes out. And unless you have that level of control, there is no way to ensure that you're complying with data localization rules, and the whole panoply of data sovereignty regulation. So that's sort of the lens through which I look at single tenant hosting in the context of data sovereignty.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I think that really gives people a bigger, better idea of why it's so important, and to your point, where the holes in the cheese are. Something that you did say earlier, Camila, that I wanted to circle back to now, which I find still so scary every time I hear anyone say it, including you, sorry, but that most organizations just don't realize it, but they, a lot of the times, are not the sole owners of their very own encryption keys. And that gives me like heart palpitations that a lot of organizations aren't even aware of that. So Camilo, if you could give us the details about why this is such a problem, that would just be fabulous.
Sure. I mean, this is should be a short answer. Whoever has possession of the encryption keys, assume they have access to the data. The contract may say that they're not supposed to access the data, and they shouldn't. But if they possess the encryption keys, just like you, they have access to your data. I think using an example really drives the point home, and the Cloud Act again is germane to this situation. And so, if only you, the customer, has the encryption keys, then when the SEC or the DOJ comes a knocking, the subpoena comes directly to you, and you work with them and comply and produce the documents. But it's done in a transparent way where you can also advise your customers, your employees, et cetera, of the situation. If you're not the sole owner of the encryption keys, that subpoena may go to a third party, and you may not be aware that the subpoena exists. And if it's between you and complying with the SEC or the DOJ, chances are the vendor is going to comply with the government. And so it's not a matter of, obviously everyone needs to comply with the regulatory bodies and the jurisdictions that govern them. But if you can facilitate transparency when it comes to your data and the data you're in charge of, you want to make sure that you're crystal clear on who has the ability to control delivery of that data. And if you have encryption keys with more than just your administrator, you're exposed.
Thank you. Thank you, Camila. That's very, to your point, succinctly said, so important. And, it actually really brings me around to the Kiteworks hardened virtual appliance. And I want to share with you all how we protect your private content. Shameless plug here. I'm a marketer. I've got to do it. But I really want to share with you how, when you deploy a Kiteworks Enterprise virtual appliance, or we host it for you in a single tenant, like Camila was talking about earlier, you benefit just immediately from the layers of hardening that are already built into it. Okay, so let me go ahead and, this one has a lot of clicks, so bear with me because there's a lot to kind of see and go with. These hardening layers protect your content and metadata from the outside world as it travels through or even rests within the private content network. For example, the layering is so effective that the 2022 Log4Shell vulnerability in open source code, natively a worst possible CVSS score of 10, played out as a moderate 4 within the Kiteworks platform. We start by designing, building, and maintaining the product to minimize exploit opportunities. We utilize best practices like OWASP and both defensive as well as offensive security practices. So this security by design starts before the first line of code is even written, shifting the security best practices as early as possible in the development timeline. We train all developers on our security practices. We review every design and every line of code and perform automated as well as manual security testing. Then we even use third-party penetration test vendors to attack the product from the internet over an ever-lengthening set of attack vectors, fixing important problems before black hats can even find them. Finally, we harness the creativity of the world's white hat hackers via bounty programs, and we train the best to know the product internals so that they can act like the advanced threat actors. This combination just of continuous efforts ensures that your content is going to be protected by best in industry hardening. Next, we minimize the attack surface by protecting the perimeter of the hardened virtual appliance. I told you so many colors. Then we start with an embedded network firewall that limits entry points to defined interfaces only, where even admins have no access to the operating system. An embedded WAF detects and blocks web REST API attacks. It requires zero maintenance by you, the user, and then an intrusion detection system, say that 10 times fast without caffeine, alerts on a variety of critical compromise indicators of an advanced persistent threat internally, and even AI-based log analysis alerts of suspicious downloads. Of course, all this information, along with comprehensive normalized audit logs, feed continuously into your SIEM for further detection, as well as forensics efforts. Like I said earlier, it's great if you're checking the boxes and saying that you're doing it and you're compliant, but if you can't prove it, how do you know? Finally, as good as those layers of hardening are, we designed the platform to protect your content, even in the unlikely event that a nation state level actor breaks through them. So we've built an assume breach architecture that slows attacks and rapidly alerts your SecOps team. We carefully vet open source libraries and run critical libraries in sandboxes to mitigate any undetected vulnerabilities or backdoors, like with zero trust micro-segmentation. We partition service tiers for external interfaces, metadata access, content access, just all of that, to block an attacker's lateral movements and exfiltration. We even provide key management options that protect keys from attackers, governments, and us, Kiteworks. Kiteworks employees can't access your systems unless your employees give us access, okay? So kind of like what Camila was talking about earlier with the encryption keys, we can't touch anything, really making sure that you are incredibly safe. And your employees can't access the operating system, just the user interface. We double encrypt data at rest to make it virtually uncrackable. We encrypt the file itself, and then we encrypt it another time with another key at the disk level. I love that slide. It's just so beautiful and colorful, and it makes my heart happy, especially on a Thursday morning. But enough for me and security built in from Kiteworks. Camilo, last thing, can you tell us more about the private content network and what it means in regards to data sovereignty?
Sure. So there, in terms of the private content network, I think you did a fantastic job describing it. But in essence, what we're talking about is a standalone ecosystem with the most secure perimeter on offer in the commercial world. You're talking about AES 256 encryption, which is the highest legally allowed level of encryption, where the encryption is applied twice so that the data is encrypted in transit and at rest. And so I won't get into the details of all the various layers of security, but the bottom line is the private content network is a standalone ecosystem where instead of commingling your data with other institutions in a multi-tenant environment, you have a standalone perimeter. The other piece of this that ties in with data sovereignty goes back to what we discussed around policy-driven controls, the ability to set controls around geolocation, the audit trail, so that you can bear out to a regulator or anyone who asks, to the extent they have the ability to and the permissions, to answer the question of the who, what, where, when for literally every component of data that's housed in the system. And at the same time, we recognize the business realities. It makes no sense to have a robust security perimeter if you can't functionally coordinate with your systems of record. And so within the private content network, you can simultaneously engage with the Microsoft Office suite, your CRM, payment processing, etc. It's in terms of the scope of data sovereignty regulations, it is ever moving. And so there is no one answer right now. You really need to home in on which jurisdictions apply to you, and then have someone within the institution, I would say at a minimum on a quarterly basis, stay abreast of new developments because they are changing rapidly. But as you do that, it's incumbent on every company to make sure that they have robust security measures in place, and within the security infrastructure, different levels of security based on the sensitivity of the data. And then the bottom line being the ability to bear out to the regulator on the back end that you did everything you could possibly do to safeguard that data. So that's my 2 cents, Danielle, on that question.
I love that. Thank you. That reminds me of a conversation that I had with a CMMC expert actually a couple of months ago. I asked him, and he actually teaches courses for auditors to become CMMC auditors, so with C3PAOs. And anyway, the question that I asked him was, how much should organizations spend financially on protecting this data that they have, with the contracts with the DoD? And his response should not have shocked me, but it still did. He said, however much the data is worth, you should spend that much money to protect it. Because if it's worth, I'm going to make up a number, $7 million, then you can bet that at least someone is going to spend $7 million to break in and get that information, which is just, to your point, so pivotal that it's constantly a conversation of what do we need to do, how can we do it, and what's the best way to do it to protect all of this valuable information. So thank you so much. Let's see, I think that is about all that we had planned for everyone today. I'm so glad that we got through a little bit early. I hate it when we have to rush and just throw information out. But before we go, I know that we have about 6 or 7 minutes. There were a couple of questions that came in. I'd love to just take a quick moment and answer those questions, if that's all right. Philip, I actually have one that came in for you. So let me get that. Philip, what are the top business risks if an organization fails to maintain data sovereignty compliance, especially around sensitive content and communications? Also, how could compliance failures negatively impact revenue?
Yeah, okay. Well, there are a lot of different risks, of course. And let me just, maybe start with the first and, maybe the most important for a company, I would say, these are just legal and financial risk and consequences. We were talking about GDPR and all the other regulations. And once again, these violations of, for example, GDPR, they can really lead to very hard fines. And not just fines, but even legal proceedings that could be, for example, the management team. So it really can significantly impacting the financial health and even the management of a company. Next, I would say you don't want to see your company's name on the news in regards of any data breach and any sensitive content or communication gets leaked. So really you have to see these reputational consequences as a huge risk, and they cannot be overstated. So not just in your, you don't want to be in the news, and of course a breach in data sovereignty can just eliminate customers' trust and clients' trust. So really a cornerstone for corporate integrity. So you should really focus on that. And I think what also the third risk is really operational disruption. If you have a data sovereignty compliance topic, you probably have to halt some of your operational ongoings, and this can really impact a company in any terms. So I think the risk. Also, a fourth one maybe is intellectual property. You just mentioned it. If you have data worth 7 million, there's probably somebody or someone who will spend almost $7 million to just get this data. So really should not leave that risk out. So really unauthorized access or loss of sensitive data can really be very good for your competitors and give them some unfair market advantage. So yeah, I think being non-compliant with data sovereignty or even have some data leak can really dramatically affect revenue. You have financial losses due to fines, maybe compromising business continuity, operational efficiency, and market competitiveness, to just put it into one sentence.
Absolutely. Thank you, Philip. And I love what you said specifically about how no one wants to see their company in the news. Having something like that attached to them, it can have continued revenue losses for months to years later. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I think we've got one more question that is for Camilo. I just wanted to ask it real quick while we've got 3 more minutes. Camilo, let's see. What are the core legal and regulatory requirements we need to be aware of when ensuring data sovereignty compliance for sensitive content?
In which jurisdiction would be my response. No, so I think similar to because many of our institutions were doing business at a minimum across the United States, or at a minimum if you're located in the whatever your jurisdiction is within the region, you tend to do business across those jurisdictions. And so because in an ideal world, you'd have a dedicated desk that would deal solely with data sovereignty issues and be an expert on GDPR issues. If you're in California, the CCPA, but that's not real life. And so if resources are limited and there's not an never-ending amount of liquidity to hire new people on the team, the most conservative way to approach this is to identify the jurisdiction where you operate with the highest level of security regulations. And so in the GDPR territories, I would say Germany comes top of mind. In the United States, for better or for worse, the great state of California is top of mind. But you would identify those jurisdictions with the highest restrictions and ensure that you comply. The idea being that if you comply with the highest bar, you should be subsumed within other jurisdictions that have a lower bar. But the reality is, you should be able to identify in very quickly. And if you can't, that's a problem and it should be addressed immediately. But you should be able to know, where are my data centers located? Where am I doing business? Where am I sending communications? And for those jurisdictions, it's imperative that you do drill down, identify the data sovereignty rules and regulations, and comply with them. Because to piggyback on Philip's point, it's not just the reputational harm, it's not just the fines, the legal spend on the back end of a data incident. IBM reported that in 2023, the average is over $4 million. I personally believe that dramatically underreports the amount of legal spend when you're done paying your outside lawyers, your forensic consultants, your PR consultants, et cetera. It becomes a massive distraction and a huge spend, when the reality is, if you do the diligence on the front end and put in robust security systems, you dramatically decrease the risk of a data incident. And the reality is that in the hacking community, the criminal hacking community, it is also a business. And so they are not looking to spend a ton of money and a ton of time to get into your system. And so if you have robust enough security, they're likely to go to the next competitor. And that's unfortunately the reality of the world, but it underscores why spending the time now is important, so that you're not in the midst of a data incident on the back end because you didn't deal with it today.
Lovely. Thank you. Well said. Well said. I realize that we are at our time. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to take the time to join us today. I hope we were able to spark some great ideas for you and hopefully answer some questions as well. If you're interested in continuing the conversation, don't be shy. Reach out on our website for a demo. We're super excited to hear from you. And a huge thank you again for my amazing guests, Camilo and Philip. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. Experts in their field. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. Everyone, have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks.
Thank you, Camilo. Bye-bye.